Everyone warned him not to raise a boy in the mountains, said the isolation would destroy them both. But what they didn't know was that the cabin hiding $265 million would teach them both that some warnings exist to protect secrets, not people. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The fluorescent lights in the Denver construction office buzzed like dying insects, casting a sickly yellow glow across stacks of blueprints and coffee-stained paperwork. Marcus Riley sat hunched over a drafting table, his calloused fingers tracing measurements he'd already checked 3 times. At 42, he looked older, the kind of older that comes not from years, but from loss. His dark hair had gone silver at the temples seemingly overnight after Sarah died. Deep lines creased the corners of his eyes, not from laughter anymore, but from the weight of memories he carried alone. The small apartment he rented in the industrial district of Denver felt like a cage. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, neighbors who screamed through the night, and a view of a parking lot where broken glass glittered under streetlights. It wasn't much, but it was all he could afford after the medical bills. Sarah's cancer had taken everything, not just her life, but their savings, their home, their future. Marcus had sold it all to buy her 6 more months. 6 months of hope that turned to ash in his hands. He'd left the military 8 years ago, traded his engineering expertise for a quieter life with Sarah. They'd planned to start a family, buy a house in the mountains, grow old watching sunsets from a porch they'd build together. But life had other plans. Now he worked construction, using skills that once designed secure facilities for the government to frame houses for developers who cut corners and paid late. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. His brother's name flashed across it, but the number wasn't right. Marcus's stomach tightened. He answered. "Is this Marcus Riley?" a woman's voice asked, professional but strained. "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Officer Patricia Mendez with the Colorado State Patrol. I'm calling about your brother Daniel Riley and his wife Jennifer." The world tilted. Marcus gripped the edge of the table. "There's been an accident," she continued. "A semi crossed the median on I-70 near Georgetown. I'm very sorry, Mr. Riley. They didn't survive." The words hit like shrapnel. Marcus couldn't breathe. Daniel, his younger brother by 4 years, the one who'd made it, who had the wife, the kid, the house in the suburbs, the one who still believed life worked out if you just tried hard enough. "There was a child in the vehicle," the officer said gently. "Owen Riley, 7 years old. He's at Denver Children's Hospital. He's stable, but he's been asking for you." Marcus was already grabbing his jacket. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. Marcus walked through sterile hallways, past rooms filled with beeping machines and whispered prayers. A nurse led him to a small room at the end of the pediatric wing. Inside, a tiny figure lay curled beneath a blanket covered in cartoon bears. Owen. Marcus had seen his nephew maybe twice a year. Birthday parties, Thanksgiving dinners where Daniel bragged about his sales numbers and Jennifer showed off photos of Owen's soccer games. Marcus had always felt like an outsider in their perfect little world. Now that world was gone. He sat down in the chair beside the bed. Owen's eyes were open, staring at nothing. His small face was pale, a bruise darkening along his left cheek. He didn't move when Marcus spoke. "Hey, buddy, it's Uncle Marcus." Nothing. No response. Just that 1,000-yard stare Marcus recognized from soldiers who'd seen too much. A doctor appeared in the doorway, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a tired smile. She motioned for Marcus to step outside. "He hasn't spoken since the accident," she said quietly. "No physical injuries beyond bruising and a mild concussion. But psychologically he's shut down. It's not uncommon in cases of severe trauma, especially in children who witness something they can't process." Marcus's throat tightened. What does he need? Time, stability, therapy, and someone who won't give up on him. She paused. "Are you his legal guardian?" Marcus blinked. He hadn't even thought about it. "I don't know. I mean, I'm his uncle, but—" "We'll need to confirm with social services. If there's no one else, and if you're willing, the court will likely place him with you." Willing. The word echoed in Marcus's head. Was he willing to take responsibility for a traumatized 7-year-old when he could barely keep himself afloat? Was he capable of being what this kid needed? He looked back through the doorway at Owen, small and broken, staring at nothing. "Yeah," Marcus said. "I'm willing." The next 3 months were hell. Marcus became Owen's legal guardian after a short court hearing where no one else from the family stepped forward. His mother, living in Arizona with her third husband, said she was too old. Daniel's in-laws wanted nothing to do with the boy, blamed him somehow for surviving when their daughter hadn't. So it fell to Marcus. He moved Owen into the spare bedroom of his cramped apartment. The room had been storage, boxes of Sarah's things he couldn't bring himself to throw away. He cleared it out in one brutal night, donating everything, making space for a bed, a small dresser, and a lamp shaped like a rocket ship he found at a thrift store. Owen didn't speak. Not a word. Marcus tried everything. He made his nephew's favorite foods, at least the ones he remembered from family dinners. He bought books, toys, art supplies. He sat with Owen every night reading aloud until his voice went hoarse. Nothing broke through. School was a disaster. The public elementary school near their apartment tried for 2 weeks. Owen wouldn't engage, wouldn't participate, just sat at his desk staring out the window while other kids played and learned around him. The teacher, a well-meaning woman named Mrs. Chen, pulled Marcus aside after the 10th day. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't think we're equipped to handle his needs. He requires specialized support, maybe a therapeutic school environment." Marcus looked into those programs. They cost more per month than he made. Insurance wouldn't cover it. He was trapped. The apartment felt smaller every day. Owen would wake screaming in the middle of the night, thrashing against nightmares Marcus couldn't see. The neighbors complained. The landlord threatened eviction. Marcus stopped sleeping. Just lay awake listening for the moment Owen's breathing would change, signaling another nightmare about to break. During the day, Marcus worked construction sites, his mind only half present. He made mistakes, simple ones that a military engineer should never make. Miscalculated a load-bearing wall, forgot to double-check a foundation measurement. His supervisor, a barrel-chested man named Tommy, pulled him aside. "Marcus, I know you're going through something," Tommy said, "but I can't have you distracted on site. Someone's gonna get hurt." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll do better." Tommy shook his head. "Maybe you need some time off. Figure things out." Time off meant no paycheck. Marcus couldn't afford that. So he pushed harder, worked longer hours, came home exhausted to an apartment where a silent child sat in the dark, staring at walls. It was late October when the letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored paper, the kind that meant something official. Marcus opened it standing in the kitchen while Owen picked at a bowl of macaroni and cheese he wouldn't eat. The letterhead read, "Hutchins and Strait, Attorneys at Law, Pine Ridge, Colorado. Dear Mr. Riley, we are writing to inform you of a matter concerning the estate of your late grandfather, Thomas Edward Riley, who passed away on March 14, 1994. As the last surviving male heir of his direct line, you are entitled to claim the property located at 17 Blackwood Trail, Pine Ridge County, Colorado. The property consists of one residential cabin, approximately 1,200 square feet, and 17 acres of forested land. The estate has remained unclaimed for 30 years due to its remote location and condition. Previous family members declined the inheritance. We have been retained to maintain minimal oversight of the property per the terms of your grandfather's will. If you wish to claim this inheritance, please contact our office within 90 days. Marcus read it twice. He barely remembered his grandfather. Thomas Riley had been a ghost even when he was alive, a man who'd left the family when Marcus's father was a teenager and vanished into the mountains. Marcus had met him exactly once, at his father's funeral 15 years ago. The old man had stood at the back of the cemetery, tall and weathered like an ancient tree, said nothing to anyone, and disappeared before the service ended. Marcus set the letter down and looked at Owen. The boy was pushing noodles around his bowl, creating small orange rivers in the cheese sauce. He hadn't eaten more than a few bites in days. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said softly. How would you feel about taking a drive this weekend? See some mountains? Owen didn't respond, but for just a second, his eyes flickered toward Marcus. It was the first time in 3 months the kid had acknowledged him at all. The drive to Pine Ridge took 4 hours. Marcus's truck, a battered Ford from 2008, rattled along Highway 34 through mountain passes, painted in autumn gold and rust. Owen sat buckled in the passenger seat, staring out the window. He still hadn't spoken, but something about him seemed less tense. His small shoulders didn't hunch quite as tightly. His hands, usually clenched into fists, rested open on his lap. Pine Ridge wasn't much of a town. A main street with a gas station, a diner called Rosie's, a general store, and a post office that doubled as the town hall. Population sign read 412. The lawyer's office was above the general store, accessed by an exterior staircase that creaked under Marcus's boots. Gerald Hutchins was 70 if he was a day, with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the deliberate movements of a man who'd learned patience living in mountain time. His office smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. "Mr. Riley," he said, shaking Marcus's hand with a grip still strong. "Thank you for coming. And this must be Owen." Owen stood close to Marcus, silent, watching. "Please, sit." Hutchins gestured to chairs worn smooth by decades of use. He opened a file folder, thin but organized. "I'll be direct. Your grandfather's property has been sitting empty since March of 1994. He left no other heirs. Your father declined the inheritance when Thomas died, said he wanted nothing to do with the old man or his mountain hermit life. Your uncles felt the same." "Why'd he leave it to me?" Marcus asked. Hutchins smiled faintly. "He didn't specifically. The will states it goes to the last surviving male heir willing to claim it. You're the first to respond in 30 years. What's the condition of the place?" "Honestly, I haven't been up there in a decade. It's 50 miles from here, end of a dirt road that's barely maintained. No electricity, well water, wood heat. Your grandfather built it himself back in the early 60s. I handled his legal affairs for 23 years. He was a private man, Mr. Riley, kept to himself, paid his taxes on time, never caused trouble." "Why'd he live like that?" Hutchins leaned back, choosing his words carefully. "He said he preferred the quiet, but between you and me, I always suspected he was running from something, or protecting something. He had the look of a man carrying weight." Marcus knew that look. He saw it in the mirror every morning. "There's one more thing," Hutchins continued. He pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "He left this with instructions to give it to whoever claimed the property." Marcus took the envelope. His name was written across it in careful script. "To Marcus Riley, if you're reading this, you're braver than the others." He opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 3 sentences. "The cabin is yours, so is everything beneath it. Some things are meant to stay buried, but I trust you'll know what to do when the time comes." Marcus stared at the words. "What does this mean?" Hutchins shrugged. "Your grandfather never explained. I asked once. He just smiled and said, 'Gerald, some secrets are heavy enough without sharing the weight.'" They drove up to see the property that same afternoon. The road from Pine Ridge climbed through thick pine forest, turning from asphalt to gravel to dirt. It narrowed to barely a single lane, branches scraping the truck's sides. Owen pressed his face against the window, watching the trees blur past. After 45 minutes of climbing, the road ended in a small clearing. And there it was. The cabin stood against a backdrop of mountains that seemed to touch the sky. It was built from massive logs, hand-hewn and fitted with precision. The roof was metal, rusted but intact. A stone chimney rose from the center, solid and strong. A wide porch wrapped around the front, railings worn smooth by weather and time. Marcus killed the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Owen unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. Marcus followed, watching as his nephew walked slowly toward the cabin. The boy moved differently here. His steps were lighter. He reached out and touched the rough bark of a nearby pine tree, his small fingers tracing the patterns. The air smelled clean. No exhaust, No industrial smoke, just pine sap and autumn leaves and something else Marcus couldn't name. Peace, maybe, or possibility. He walked up the porch steps. They were solid under his weight. No give, no rot. The front door was locked with a heavy brass padlock. Hutchins had given him the key. It turned smoothly. Inside, the cabin was dim but dry. Dust covered everything in a thick blanket, but beneath it Marcus could see craftsmanship that took his breath away. The main room was open, with exposed beam ceilings at least 12 feet high. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall. The furniture was simple but well made. A table carved from a single piece of wood, chairs that matched, shelves built into the walls. A kitchen area occupied one corner with a cast-iron stove and a hand pump over a deep sink. 2 doorways led to what looked like bedrooms. Another door, reinforced with metal straps, led to what must be a workshop or storage. Marcus walked through slowly, his engineer's eye noting details. The log joints were perfect, no gaps, no settling. The floor was level, despite the cabin being built on a slope. The windows, though dirty, were double-paned and well-sealed. This wasn't some thrown-together shack. This was a fortress disguised as a cabin. He heard a sound and turned. Owen stood in the doorway of one of the bedrooms, looking back at Marcus, and for the first time in 3 months, the boy smiled. Just a small curve of his lips, barely there but real. Something in Marcus's chest loosened. That night, they drove back to Pine Ridge and got a room at the town's only motel. Marcus lay awake while Owen slept beside him in the other bed. For the first time since the accident, the boy hadn't woken screaming. He'd fallen asleep within minutes and stayed that way, breathing deep and steady. Marcus stared at the ceiling, thinking. The cabin was impossible. No electricity meant no internet, no easy way to work remotely. Homeschooling Owen in total isolation felt reckless at best, dangerous at worst. The nearest town was an hour away over terrible roads. Winter would be brutal. They'd be cut off for months. Every logical part of his brain said no. This was insane. He had responsibilities, bills, a life in Denver. Walking away from all of it to live in a mountain cabin with a traumatized child was the definition of bad judgment. But then he looked at Owen, sleeping peacefully for the first time in 93 days. And he remembered that smile. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his mother. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Marcus, it's 2 in the morning. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I'm in Pine Ridge. I'm looking at Grandpa Thomas's property." Silence. Then, "Why would you do that?" "It was left to me. I'm thinking about claiming it." "That place?" His mother's voice went sharp. "Marcus, your grandfather was not well. He lived like an animal up there. No power, no people. He died alone, and it took them 3 weeks to find his body. Is that what you want?" "Mom." "And you're thinking of taking Owen there? A child who's been through trauma? He needs professionals, Marcus. Doctors, school, other children. Not isolation in the middle of nowhere with a man who doesn't know the first thing about raising kids." The words stung because they were partially true, but Marcus kept his voice steady. Owen smiled today. First time since the accident. He fell asleep without nightmares. This place, there's something about it that's good for him. "It's new," she snapped. "That's all. Give it a week and he'll be just as broken as before, except now you'll both be trapped on a mountain with no help, no resources, no future." "Don't be stupid, Marcus. You're not thinking clearly." "Maybe I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years." "You're running away. From Sarah's death, from responsibility, from reality, and you're dragging that poor child down with you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'm not running. I'm choosing something different. It's a mistake, a huge one, and when it all falls apart, don't come crying to me." She hung up. Marcus set the phone down and looked at Owen again. The boy's face was relaxed, peaceful. In Denver, he'd looked like a ghost. Here, he looked like a child. The decision crystallized in Marcus's mind. It wasn't logical. It wasn't safe. But it was right. They spent the next 2 days cleaning the cabin. Marcus brought supplies from town. A generator for temporary power, cleaning supplies, basic tools. Owen helped without being asked, sweeping floors, wiping windows, organizing things with surprising care. On the second afternoon, as they cleared out the workshop, Marcus found something strange. The room was immaculate. Every tool hung in its designated spot on pegboards, labeled with careful handwriting. Saws, hammers, chisels, all perfectly maintained despite 30 years of neglect. The workbench was clean, the floor swept, but the measurements were wrong. Marcus noticed it immediately. The workshop's interior dimensions didn't match the exterior. He paced it off 3 times. The outside walls suggested the room should be 20 feet by 16 feet. Inside, it measured 18 by 14. 4 feet of space was missing, hidden behind the walls. He ran his hands along the boards looking for seams, latches, anything. Owen watched from the doorway, head tilted with curiosity. "Uncle Marcus?" The voice was small, rough from disuse, but real. Marcus spun around. Owen had spoken, actually spoken. "Yeah, buddy? The floor sounds different here." Owen pointed to a spot near the back corner. Marcus knelt and knocked on the boards. Hollow. He grabbed a pry bar and carefully lifted the planks. Beneath them, a metal panel with a keyhole, but no key. He sat back, staring at it. What had his grandfather hidden, and why? That evening, they drove back to town for supplies. At Rosie's diner, Marcus ordered burgers while Owen colored on a paper placemat with crayons the waitress brought. A man slid into the booth across from them without asking. He was old, 70s maybe, with a face like weathered leather and eyes sharp as broken glass. "You're Thomas's grandson," the man said. Not a question. "Marcus Riley, and you are?" "Frank Cordell. I live about 5 miles down from your place. Closest neighbor you've got." Marcus shook his hand. Frank's grip was iron. "Heard you were poking around the cabin," Frank continued. "People talk in small towns. We're thinking of staying." Frank's eyebrows rose. "Staying? Like living there?" "Maybe." The old man leaned back, studying them both. His gaze lingered on Owen, who'd stopped coloring and was watching the conversation with unusual focus. "Your grandfather was a good man," Frank said slowly, "but he had his reasons for living out here alone. Some folks said he was hiding. Others said he was protecting something. Me? I think he was doing both." "Protecting what?" Frank shrugged. "He never said. But I'll tell you this. In all the years I knew Thomas, and that's going back to 1971, I never once saw him leave that property for more than a day. He had things delivered, paid cash, kept to himself, and twice, maybe 3 times, I saw government vehicles drive up that road. Black SUVs, men in suits. They'd go up, stay a few hours, leave. Thomas never talked about it." Marcus felt a chill. "When was the last time?" "Week before he died, spring of '94, 3 vehicles. They were up there for 6 hours. After they left, I went to check on Thomas. He was sitting on his porch with a shotgun across his lap. Told me if anyone came asking questions, I didn't know nothing, and I didn't." "Did they come back after he died?" "Oh yeah, day after they found his body. Tore that place apart, or tried to. They left empty-handed, far as I could tell. Looked frustrated." Marcus absorbed this. "What do you think they were looking for?" Frank smiled, showing teeth still mostly his own. "Son, I learned a long time ago not to ask questions about things that could get me killed. But I'll say this. Your grandfather was military. Not just any military. He was an engineer. Worked on classified projects during the war. The big one, World War II. After he came back, he was different. My daddy told me Thomas Riley came home from Europe carrying ghosts." Owen tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Uncle Marcus, I'm tired." It was the second full sentence the boy had spoken. Marcus's throat tightened with gratitude. "Okay, buddy. We'll head back to the motel." Frank stood. "You're really going to live up there? Raise that boy in isolation?" Marcus met his eyes. "I'm going to give him what he needs. Quiet, space, time to heal. And yeah, maybe some isolation is exactly what we both need." Frank nodded slowly, Just remember, Marcus, your grandfather spent 30 years keeping secrets. Some of them might still be buried up there, and secrets like that, they don't always stay quiet. That night, back in the motel, Marcus made his decision official. He called his supervisor and quit. He called his landlord and gave notice. He started making a list of everything they'd need to survive a winter in the mountains. His phone rang constantly. His mother called 4 times, each message more frantic than the last. Cousins he hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions. A social worker from Denver left a voicemail saying they needed to schedule a home visit to assess the living situation. Marcus ignored them all. Instead, he sat with Owen and showed him pictures of the cabin on his phone. "This is going to be our home," he said. "Just you and me. It's going to be hard sometimes, cold in winter, quiet all the time. But I think it's where we need to be. What do you think?" Owen looked at the photos for a long time. Then he leaned against Marcus's side and whispered, "It feels safe." And that was all Marcus needed to hear. 2 weeks later, a moving truck that was really just a U-Haul, Marcus drove himself, climbed the mountain road loaded with everything they owned. It wasn't much: clothes, books, tools, a few pieces of furniture from the apartment. Marcus had sold almost everything else. Used the money to buy a solar panel system, a satellite internet setup, a wood stove, enough supplies to last them through winter. They arrived at the cabin on a grey November morning. Snow had already dusted the highest peaks. The air bit with cold that promised harsher days ahead. Marcus and Owen unloaded in silence, carrying boxes through the front door into their new home. With each trip, Marcus felt the city falling away, the noise, the pressure, the constant hum of a life that had stopped making sense. By nightfall, they had the generator running, the wood stove crackling, and sleeping bags laid out in the bedrooms. They ate canned soup heated on the stove and listened to the wind move through the pines outside. Owen sat cross-legged on the floor, holding a flashlight, examining the walls like he was searching for something. "What are you looking for?" Marcus asked. "Grandpa's puzzle," Owen said simply. Marcus smiled. The kid was right. The whole cabin felt like a puzzle. Hidden spaces, perfect craftsmanship, secrets buried in the foundation. That first night, Marcus lay in his sleeping bag listening to the absolute silence of the mountains. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors fighting through thin walls. Just wind and the occasional crack of settling wood. In the other room, Owen slept soundly. No nightmares, no screams, just the deep, even breathing of a child finally at peace. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about his grandfather's note. "Some things are meant to stay buried, but I trust you'll know what to do when the time comes." He didn't know what he'd find beneath the cabin. Didn't know if it was treasure or trouble or just an old man's paranoia made manifest. But for the first time since Sarah died, Marcus felt something close to purpose stirring in his chest. Whatever secrets Thomas Riley had buried, Marcus would uncover them. Not because he was brave, but because he'd stopped being afraid of the unknown. He'd already lost everything that mattered once. Now, on this mountain with a silent boy learning to speak again, he had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The warnings didn't matter. The family's anger didn't matter. The social workers and their clipboards and their concerns didn't matter. What mattered was this: Owen smiled here. Owen spoke here. Owen was healing here. And sometimes that's all the reason you need to know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Winter hit the mountains like a fist. By mid-December, snow had piled 3 feet deep around the cabin, transforming the world into something ancient and silent. Marcus woke before dawn each morning, the cold biting through the wool blankets, his breath visible in the dark. He'd stoke the wood stove, coaxing flames from embers, and wait for the cabin to warm before waking Owen. Those first months were brutal. Not because of the cold or the isolation, but because Marcus was learning to be something he'd never been before: a father. He had no manual, no guide, just instinct and determination, and the desperate hope that he wasn't destroying this kid's life. Owen was 8 now, still small for his age, still carrying shadows in his eyes, but different. The nightmares had stopped almost entirely. The silence had broken into words, then sentences, then actual conversations. Not constant, not yet, but real. Their days developed a rhythm. Marcus would wake Owen at 7. They'd eat breakfast together, usually oatmeal with honey and dried fruit, sometimes eggs from the chickens Marcus had bought from a farmer in Pine Ridge. After breakfast, lessons. Marcus had ordered homeschool curriculum online, books on math, reading, science, history. He taught Owen the way his grandfather had taught him, patiently, practically, with hands-on examples. "If we need to cut firewood to last 30 days, Marcus would say, and we burn 0.5 cords per week, how much do we need?" Owen would work it out on paper, his small hand forming careful numbers. 2.14 cords. Close, round up, always round up in the mountains. Better to have extra than to freeze. After lessons came chores, hauling water from the well, splitting wood, checking the solar panels for snow, feeding the chickens, maintaining the generator. Owen took to the work naturally, his small body growing stronger, his movements more confident. Afternoons were for projects. Marcus had started teaching Owen basic carpentry, how to measure twice and cut once, how to feel the grain of wood, how to respect tools that could hurt you if you weren't careful. They built a chicken coop together, then a woodshed, then a workbench for Owen in the corner of the workshop. "Why does Grandpa's workshop feel bigger on the outside?" Owen asked one afternoon while they were organizing tools. Marcus looked up from the saw blade he was sharpening. "What do you mean?" Owen walked to the wall and knocked on it. "When we're outside, the building looks wider, but inside there's a wall here." He pointed. "It doesn't match." Marcus stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. The kid was right. He'd noticed it months ago, but had been too busy surviving to investigate. Now, with winter locking them in and routines established, curiosity stirred. He grabbed a tape measure and had Owen help him measure the interior walls, then the exterior. The numbers didn't lie. They were missing nearly 4 feet of space along the back wall. The wall Owen had been knocking on. Marcus ran his hands along the boards, looking for seams. Nothing. The wall looked solid, perfectly constructed. But his engineer's mind knew better. You didn't build false walls without a reason. "Grandpa built a puzzle," Owen said, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. Marcus smiled. "Yeah, buddy, I think he did." That night, after Owen had gone to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table studying the crude blueprints he'd found in a drawer. They showed the cabin's layout, but someone, probably his grandfather, had drawn additional lines in pencil, faint and barely visible. Annotations in tiny handwriting, load-bearing modified, false wall secured, access via workshop floor. Marcus looked at the floor. He'd found that metal panel months ago, the one hidden under the floorboards. He'd tried every key he owned, but none fit. Now he wondered if the key wasn't here at all. Maybe it was somewhere else. Maybe it was hidden like everything else his grandfather had built. The next morning, Marcus drove into Pine Ridge for supplies. The town had grudgingly accepted him over the past months. He'd fixed the general store's generator when it died in November, rebuilt the steps at Rosie's diner without being asked, helped patch the roof on the post office before a storm. People nodded to him now. Some even smiled. He was loading lumber into his truck when Frank Cordell appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. "Settling in okay?" Frank asked, leaning against the truck bed. "We're managing. Heard the boys talking now, playing outside. Looks healthy." Marcus tensed slightly. "He's doing better." Frank pulled out a pipe and lit it, the smoke sweet and thick. "You know, your grandfather used to come into town once a month like clockwork. First Saturday. He'd buy supplies, pay cash, exchange maybe 10 words total, then disappear back up the mountain. Did that for 33 years. You keeping track? Hard not to notice a man that consistent." Frank puffed his pipe. "But there was one month he didn't come. February of 1993. I got worried, drove up to check on him. Found him on his porch, rifle across his lap, looking pale as death. He'd fallen, broken his leg. Been sitting there for 3 days waiting for it to heal enough to move." Marcus's stomach tightened. "Why didn't he call for help?" No phone, by choice. Frank's eyes were distant, remembering. I wanted to take him to a hospital. He refused, said he couldn't leave the property, not for a broken leg, not for anything. I asked him why. You know what he said? Marcus shook his head. He said, Frank, some men guard borders, some guard secrets. I'm guarding both, and the day I leave this mountain unattended is the day something precious gets lost forever. Frank tapped his pipe against the truck. I set his leg myself, brought him supplies for 2 months while he healed. Never asked what he was guarding, figured a man's got a right to his secrets. But you're telling me this now, why? Frank met his eyes. Because you're digging. I can tell. And before you dig too deep, I want you to understand what kind of man your grandfather was. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't paranoid. He was committed to something bigger than himself. And that kind of commitment either comes from love or from fear. With Thomas, I could never tell which. Marcus absorbed this. If you had to guess, what do you think he was guarding? Frank smiled sadly. I stopped guessing 20 years ago. But I'll tell you this. Whatever it is, it meant more to him than his own life. Make sure it means something to you before you decide to carry that weight. Back at the cabin, Marcus found Owen in the workshop, kneeling by the metal panel in the floor. The boy had pulled up several more floorboards, revealing more of the panel. It was larger than Marcus had thought, nearly 3 feet square, with reinforced edges and a complex locking mechanism. I think I found something, Owen said, holding up a small piece of paper. It was wedged between the floorboards. Marcus took it. The paper was old, yellowed, with a string of numbers written in his grandfather's careful hand. 1917-42-63. What does it mean? Owen asked. Marcus stared at the numbers. They could be anything. Coordinates, a combination, a date. He looked around the workshop, searching for something that might use those numbers. His eyes landed on the old metal file cabinet in the corner. He'd assumed it was locked, never bothered trying to open it. He walked over and tried the numbers on the combination lock. 19 right, 17 left, 42 right, 63 left. Click. The lock opened. Inside the cabinet were 3 drawers. The first contained old receipts, tax documents, mundane records of a man paying bills and buying supplies. The second held more interesting items. Photographs from World War II. Marcus's grandfather in uniform standing beside other engineers. Blueprints for structures Marcus didn't recognize. Letters with portions blacked out by sensors. The third drawer was locked separately with a keyhole, and hanging on a small hook inside the second drawer was a key. Marcus's hands trembled as he unlocked the third drawer. Inside were journals. 5 of them, leather-bound, filled with dense handwriting. He pulled out the first one and opened it to a random page. March 7th, 1962. Completed foundation reinforcement. Secondary vault now sealed beneath primary structure. Assets secured per protocol 7-gamma. No one must know. The weight of this responsibility grows heavier with each passing year, but I will not falter. This is my penance and my purpose. Marcus flipped through more pages. References to the asset appeared repeatedly. Mentions of relocation protocols and preservation for future generation. Maps with coordinates that didn't correspond to any location Marcus recognized. Technical drawings of what looked like climate-controlled storage systems. Uncle Marcus? Owen's voice was small. What did Grandpa hide? Marcus closed the journal, his mind racing. I don't know yet, buddy, but I think we're about to find out. Over the next week, Marcus read every journal while Owen was asleep. The picture that emerged was staggering. His grandfather had been a military engineer during World War II, specialized in structural design and secure facility construction. After the war, he'd been recruited for a classified project codenamed Operation Safeguard. The details were vague. Portions of the journals had been written in code Marcus couldn't crack, but the general outline was clear. Thomas Riley had been tasked with securing and relocating valuable assets recovered from Europe after the war ended. Things that needed to be hidden, protected, preserved until they could be properly handled by authorities who might never come. But something had gone wrong. The program had been shut down abruptly in 1947, His grandfather had been ordered to dispose of everything. Instead, he'd hidden it, brought it here, to the middle of nowhere, and spent the rest of his life guarding it. The journals mentioned the cabin's construction in 1961, how he'd designed it with hidden spaces, reinforced foundations, multiple layers of security. He'd built the workshop last, in 1963, and that's when he'd sealed the final vault. Whatever was under this cabin, it had been there for over 60 years. Marcus should have felt excited, should have felt the thrill of discovery. Instead, he felt dread creeping up his spine. Because the journals also mentioned visitors, government agents who came asking questions, pressure to reveal the location, threats, subtle at first, then more direct. His grandfather's final entry, dated March 2nd, 1994, just 12 days before he died, was chilling. They came again today. 3 cars. Same men as before, older now, but no less determined. They know I have something. They just don't know where. I told them nothing. I will tell them nothing. This secret dies with me, or it passes to someone worthy. Someone who will understand what it represents and why it must be protected. If you're reading this and you've made it this far, then you're that person. Trust your instincts. Trust the silence. And remember, some treasures aren't meant to be spent. They're meant to be returned. Returned to whom? Marcus had no idea. 6 months into their mountain life, and Owen had transformed. The silent, traumatized child who'd stared at walls was gone. In his place stood a boy who laughed, who explored, who asked 1,000 questions a day. His 8th birthday had passed quietly, just the 2 of them with a chocolate cake Marcus had attempted and mostly failed to bake. Owen hadn't cared. He'd blown out the candles and wished for more days just like this. Marcus had started taking odd jobs in Pine Ridge and the surrounding area. His military engineering background made him valuable. He repaired generators, designed and built additions to homes, consulted on foundation problems. Word spread. People from 3 counties away called, asking for his help. The money wasn't great, but it was enough. Owen came with him sometimes, sitting quietly in the truck while Marcus worked, absorbing everything. The boy had a natural aptitude for mechanics and construction. He'd watch Marcus diagnose a problem, follow the logic, ask smart questions. More than once, Owen spotted something Marcus had missed. The belt's cracked, Owen said during one job, pointing to a generator that wouldn't start. Marcus looked. The kid was right. The belt had a hairline fracture barely visible. "Good eye, buddy." Owen beamed, but the whispers never stopped. At Rosie's diner, Marcus overheard 2 women talking in the booth behind him. "Raising a child in total isolation like that, it's not natural. I heard the boy was in school before. Something happened. Now the uncle's hiding him away. Probably trying to avoid social services. You know these types." Marcus clenched his jaw and said nothing. Let them talk. He knew the truth. Owen was thriving. That was all that mattered. Spring arrived slowly, snow melting in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath. Marcus had started working on the cabin's foundation, shoring up areas where freeze-thaw cycles had caused minor settling. That's when he noticed the stonework. It was too perfect, too precise. Foundation stones were typically rough, functional. These were cut and fitted with surgical accuracy, and the pattern was wrong. There were stones that seemed decorative, placed at odd intervals with no structural purpose, unless they had a different purpose entirely. Marcus mapped the pattern over 3 days, photographing every stone, measuring distances, looking for meaning. Owen helped, his small fingers tracing the mortar lines, calling out measurements. On the 4th day, Owen stepped back and tilted his head. "It looks like a star." Marcus looked at his map. The kid was right. The decorative stones, when connected, formed a 5-pointed star pattern. And at the center of that star, beneath the workshop, was the metal panel they'd found. "Grandpa really did build a puzzle," Marcus whispered. "What happens next will uncover a secret that was never supposed to be found, a truth that will turn their quiet mountain life into something extraordinary, and a legacy that proves sometimes the people who warn you the loudest are the ones who know the least. Stay tuned to see what they find. If you're enjoying this story, Please like, share, and subscribe for more. That night, Marcus used the key from the file cabinet on the metal panel. It fit perfectly. The lock mechanism was complex, requiring not just the key, but a specific sequence. Marcus worked by flashlight, his fingers following instincts he didn't know he had. Owen sat nearby, watching with wide eyes. Click. The panel released. Beneath it, a ladder descended into darkness. Metal rungs bolted into concrete. The air that rose from below was dry, climate-controlled, carrying the faint smell of machine oil and preservation. Marcus looked at Owen. Stay here. No. Owen's voice was firm. We do this together. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to protect the boy from whatever lay below, but something in Owen's expression stopped him. This was their journey now. Both of them. Okay, together. But you stay behind me. They descended 12 feet into a chamber carved from solid rock and reinforced with concrete. Marcus's flashlight swept across the space, revealing rows of metal shelving, storage containers sealed with military precision, and walls lined with what looked like climate control systems, still humming softly after decades. But it was what sat on the shelves that made Marcus's breath catch. Document cases, dozens of them. And beside them, smaller containers with viewing windows. Through those windows, Marcus could see artwork. Small pieces carefully preserved, coins in archival holders, certificates sealed in protective sleeves. He moved closer, hands shaking, and opened one of the document cases. Inside, manifests, lists written in multiple languages, names, addresses, descriptions of items, and at the top of each manifest, stamped in faded red ink, property recovered from displaced persons, Europe, 1945 through 1947, to be returned to rightful owners or surviving family members. Marcus's throat tightened. His grandfather hadn't stolen this. He'd been protecting it, preserving it, waiting for a day when it could be returned to the people it had been taken from. Uncle Marcus, look. Owen pointed to a corner where a small desk sat, perfectly preserved. On it, a letter under glass. Marcus walked over and read it. It was addressed to whoever finds this. The letter was long, detailed, written in his grandfather's careful script. It explained everything. How Thomas Riley had been part of a team tasked with recovering stolen property after World War II. Art, valuables, family heirlooms taken by retreating forces. How the program had been designed to catalogue everything and return it. But politics had intervened. Countries arguing over ownership. Items disappearing into private collections. Bureaucracy grinding the mission to a halt. In 1947, Thomas and his team had been ordered to turn everything over to a central authority that Thomas didn't trust. He'd seen too much corruption, too many valuable pieces vanish. So he'd done the unthinkable. He'd taken a portion of what he was supposed to surrender, the items he knew had clear ownership claims, the pieces with names attached, with families waiting, and he'd hidden them. Spent the rest of his life cataloguing them, maintaining them, documenting everything, waiting for a time when they could be safely returned. The letter ended with a simple plea. Return these items to their rightful owners. I could not. Perhaps you can. Marcus sat down hard on the concrete floor. His mind spun. He wasn't looking at a treasure. He was looking at responsibility, a burden his grandfather had carried alone for 47 years. Owen sat beside him, quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We have to give them back, don't we?" Marcus nodded, throat too tight to speak. They climbed back up the ladder as dawn began to grey the sky outside. Neither of them had slept. Marcus made coffee while Owen sat at the kitchen table, unusually quiet. "Are we in trouble?" Owen finally asked. Marcus considered the question. Legally, morally, practically, were they in trouble? Almost certainly. This wasn't finders keepers. This was stolen government property, or recovered property, or something in between that lawyers would argue about for years. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but I know what Grandpa wanted, and I know what feels right." "What's that?" "Finding the families, giving everything back." Owen nodded slowly. Then, what if the government takes it first? Marcus looked at his nephew, surprised by the insight. The kid was right. If word got out about what was under this cabin, federal agents would swarm the place. Everything would disappear into evidence lockers or bureaucratic limbo. The families his grandfather had tried to protect would never see their belongings again. "Then we keep it quiet," Marcus said, "until we figure out how to do this right." But keeping secrets in small towns is like holding water in cupped hands. It always finds a way to slip through. 2 weeks later, Marcus was in the workshop when he heard a vehicle approaching. Unusual. They rarely had visitors. He walked outside to find a black Ford Explorer parked in the clearing. 2 men in casual clothes stepped out, but their bearing screamed federal agents. "Marcus Riley?" the first one asked. He was 40, fit, with the kind of calm that came from training. "Who's asking?" "Agent Carson, FBI. This is Agent Webb. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your grandfather's property." Marcus's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "The kind best discussed inside." Marcus glanced toward the cabin where Owen was reading. "Got a warrant?" Carson smiled thinly. "We're not here to search, just to talk. We can do this friendly or we can come back with paperwork. Your choice." Marcus let them in, but only as far as the porch. He stayed standing, arms crossed. "Your grandfather," Carson began, "Thomas Riley. He worked on classified projects after World War II. You're aware of this?" "I know he was in the military." "He was part of Operation Safeguard, asset recovery and preservation. When the program shut down, certain items went missing. We've been looking for them for a long time." 70 years is a long time to hold a grudge. Webb spoke for the first time. "It's not about grudges. It's about national security and international law. Those items were supposed to be returned through proper channels." "And were they?" Marcus asked. "The ones that went through proper channels? Did they make it back to the families?" Carson's expression flickered. "That's not relevant." "It's completely relevant. My grandfather didn't trust the system. Maybe he had good reason." "Mr. Riley," Carson's voice hardened, "if you're in possession of government property, you're required by law to turn it over. Failure to do so is a federal crime." "I'm not in possession of anything except a cabin and 17 acres. "We'd like to search the property." "Not without a warrant." "We can get one." "Then get one." Marcus held Carson's gaze. "Until then, you're trespassing." The agents left, but Marcus knew they'd be back. He stood on the porch long after their vehicle disappeared down the mountain, his mind racing. He had maybe 72 hours before they returned with legal authority to tear this place apart. That night, he sat Owen down and explained the situation. The boy listened carefully, his young face serious. "What are we going to do?" Owen asked. Marcus took a breath. "We're going to document everything, photograph it, catalog it, create backups. Then we're going to find the best lawyer we can afford and figure out how to return those items the right way, even if it means fighting the government." "Will we win?" "I don't know, but Grandpa spent his whole life protecting this secret. The least we can do is try to finish what he started." Owen nodded. Then, "Uncle Marcus, I'm glad we moved here. I'm glad we found this." Marcus pulled his nephew into a hug. "Me too, buddy. Me too." Over the next 2 days, they worked frantically. Marcus photographed every item in the underground chamber, every document, every manifest. Owen helped organize files, his small hands careful with the fragile papers. They worked 16-hour days, fueled by coffee and determination. On the 3rd day, Marcus drove to Pine Ridge and used the library's computer to upload encrypted copies of everything to 3 different cloud storage accounts. Insurance. If the government seized the physical items, at least the documentation would survive. Frank found him there, hunched over the keyboard, eyes red with exhaustion. "Heard you had visitors," Frank said quietly. Marcus looked up. "News travels fast." "It does when 2 FBI agents stop at Rosie's asking about the crazy hermit's grandson." Frank pulled up a chair. "They came to see me too, asking what I knew about Thomas, what he might have hidden. I told them the truth. Nothing. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. Frank waved it off. I've been dragged into worse, but I'll tell you what I told them. Your grandfather was a good man, doing what he thought was right. If he hid something, he had his reasons. And if you're protecting those reasons, then you've got my support. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Those boys aren't going to give up. They'll come back with warrants, investigators, the whole federal circus. You ready for that fight? Marcus thought about Owen, about the families waiting somewhere in the world for belongings they thought were lost forever, about his grandfather dying alone to protect a secret he couldn't share. Yeah, Marcus said. I'm ready. That night, back at the cabin, Marcus found Owen sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the stars. The boy had been quiet all day, processing everything. You okay? Marcus asked, sitting beside him. Owen nodded. Then, do you think Grandpa was lonely? The question caught Marcus off guard. Probably, yeah. But he stayed anyway, because it was important. Yeah. Owen was quiet for a long moment. I'm not lonely here, even with just us. Marcus wrapped an arm around his nephew's shoulders. Me neither. If we have to fight to keep this place, to finish what Grandpa started, I want to help. Marcus looked down at the small, serious face. Owen had grown so much in 8 months. Not just physically, but in spirit, in strength, in understanding. The traumatized child who couldn't speak was gone. In his place stood a boy who understood sacrifice, purpose, legacy. Okay, Marcus said. We fight together. Above them, the stars wheeled through the Colorado sky, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere in those same stars, Thomas Riley had once looked up and made a choice to protect something precious, even if it cost him everything. Now Marcus and Owen carried that same choice, the same burden, the same purpose. And whatever came next, whether federal agents with warrants or lawyers with questions or a fight that could take years, they would face it the way they'd faced everything else since coming to this mountain. Together. The warrant arrived 6 days later. Marcus watched from the porch as 3 vehicles wound up the mountain road, dark against the spring snow that still clung to the higher elevations. Agent Carson led the procession, followed by a forensic team and what looked like archivists in a white van. Owen stood beside Marcus, his hand gripping the porch railing. The boy was 9 now, taller, his shoulders broader from months of mountain work. His silence had returned, not from trauma this time, but from understanding. They both knew what was about to happen. Mr. Riley, Carson said, stepping out and holding up papers. Federal search warrant for the premises known as 17 Blackwood Trail. We'll need you and the child to wait outside while we conduct our search. Marcus took the warrant and read it carefully. It was comprehensive, authorizing search of all structures, grounds, and subsurface areas. They'd done their homework. How long? Marcus asked. As long as it takes. Marcus looked at Owen. Go pack a bag. We're staying in town tonight. They watched from the clearing as agents and technicians swarmed the cabin. Marcus had sealed the underground chamber before they arrived, replaced the floorboards, scattered tools to make the workshop look naturally cluttered. But he knew it wouldn't matter. These people were professionals. They'd find it. It took them 4 hours. Carson emerged from the workshop, his face carefully neutral, and made a phone call. Within 30 minutes, 2 more vehicles arrived. One carried additional security. The other brought someone Marcus recognized from news reports, Director Patricia Vance, Deputy Director of the FBI's art crime team. She was 50, sharp-eyed, wearing a practical suit and boots made for mountain terrain. She walked directly to Marcus. Mr. Riley, I'm Director Vance. I need you to tell me exactly what you know about what's under your cabin. Marcus met her gaze. I know my grandfather hid items there. I know they were supposed to be returned to families after World War II. And I know he kept them safe because he didn't trust the system to do the right thing. Vance's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. Have you removed anything from the site? No. Sold anything? Told anyone else about this? No and no. She studied him for a long moment. Mr. Riley, What's down there represents one of the largest discoveries of recovered wartime assets in 70 years. Preliminary assessment suggests a value exceeding $265 million. This is a federal matter now. The items will need to be seized, catalogued, and processed according to international law. And then what? Marcus asked. They disappear into government storage for another 70 years while lawyers argue? That's not how this works, isn't it? My grandfather was part of your system. He saw what happened to items that went through proper channels. That's why he hid them. Vance's jaw tightened. Your grandfather broke federal law, multiple laws. What he did, regardless of intention, was theft of government property. They're not government property, Marcus said quietly. They belong to families, people who lost everything. My grandfather documented every single item, where it came from, who it belonged to. That's not theft, that's preservation. Let me see the documentation. Marcus had anticipated this. He'd kept the original journals hidden, but he'd made copies. He handed her a folder containing photocopies of manifests, lists of names, addresses from the 1940s. Vance flipped through them, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up. Where are the originals? Safe. I could compel you to produce them. You could try. They locked eyes. Around them, agents continued their work, photographing, measuring, documenting. Owen sat on the porch steps, watching everything with quiet intensity. Vance closed the folder. I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Riley. What happens next depends largely on your cooperation. If you work with us, provide full documentation, assist in the identification and restitution process, we can potentially avoid criminal charges. If you obstruct, hide evidence, or attempt to claim ownership, this gets very complicated very fast. Marcus considered this. I want immunity, in writing, for me and my nephew, and I want a seat at the table when decisions are made about where these items go. You're not in a position to negotiate. Actually, I am. Because without my grandfather's documentation, you have no idea who most of these items belong to. The manifests, the letters, the correspondence he maintained with families, all of that is in the originals. And you need me to give them to you voluntarily, because forcing me to produce them could compromise their admissibility in any legal proceedings. Vance's eyes narrowed. You've consulted with a lawyer. I'm not stupid, Director. And I'm not my grandfather. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life hiding alone on a mountain, but I'm also not going to let these items disappear into bureaucratic limbo. So yes, I'll cooperate, but on terms that ensure the right thing gets done. Vance pulled out her phone and walked away, speaking in low tones. Marcus watched agents carry equipment into the workshop, setting up lights, preparing to excavate the full extent of the underground chamber. Owen came to stand beside him. Are we in trouble? He whispered. We're in something, Marcus replied, but we're not alone, not anymore. The excavation took 3 weeks. Marcus and Owen were allowed to stay in the cabin, but were barred from the workshop. They watched through windows as technicians carefully removed every item from the underground vault, catalogued it, photographed it, sealed it in evidence containers. Director Vance set up a command center in Pine Ridge, taking over the back room of Rosie's diner. Marcus met with her every other day, providing context from his grandfather's journals, helping identify items, explaining the system Thomas Riley had created. The scope of what his grandfather had hidden was staggering. 73 pieces of artwork, ranging from small sketches to significant paintings. 237 rare coins from 12 different countries. Historical bonds and certificates worth millions in today's market. Family heirlooms, jewelry, photographs, documents, items that had monetary value but priceless sentimental worth. And letters, hundreds of letters, correspondence between Thomas Riley and families he'd tried to track down over decades. Some had responded, not knowing he actually had their belongings. Others had never replied, lost to time, displacement, death. One letter, dated August 3, 1976, was from a woman in Paris. Dear Mr. Riley, I received your inquiry about my family's painting. I hardly dared hope it still existed. My father spoke of it often before he died. It was the last thing we owned before the soldiers came. If you truly have it, if it is real, I would give anything to see it again. Not for money, just to touch something my father loved. Please, if this is not a cruel joke, please write back." Marcus's hands shook as he read it to Vance. "Did my grandfather respond?" Vance checked her files. "Yes, 3 weeks later. He told her he had the painting, sent her a photograph of it. He promised to keep it safe until she could claim it properly." "Did she?" "She died in 1988. Cancer, but she has a daughter. We found her 2 days ago. Lives in Lyon. We sent her the photographs." Vance's voice softened. "She cried for an hour on the phone. Said her mother never stopped hoping." Marcus closed his eyes, overwhelmed. This wasn't about treasure. It was about memory, about stolen lives, about things that couldn't be measured in dollars. Owen, now helping sort documents at a folding table in the corner, looked up. "Are we going to give it back to her? The painting?" Vance nodded. "Yes, as soon as we verify chain of custody and ownership." "Good," Owen said simply, and returned to his work. Over the following months, the investigation deepened. Marcus provided the original journals, all 5 of them, under an immunity agreement that took 6 lawyers 2 weeks to negotiate. The journals revealed the full scope of Thomas Riley's mission. He'd been part of a 12-person team in Operation Safeguard, tasked with recovering stolen property from across Europe between 1945 and 1947. The team had catalogued over 30,000 items. Most went through official channels, but Thomas had noticed patterns. Items disappearing from storage, families filing claims that went unanswered, valuable pieces ending up in private collections of government officials. In March of 1947, the program was abruptly shut down. The team was ordered to transfer all remaining items to a central processing facility in Washington, D.C. Thomas suspected the facility was a cover, that items would be sold or distributed to political allies rather than returned to rightful owners. So he'd done the unthinkable. He'd hidden 73 cases worth of items with the clearest ownership claims. Pieces he knew belonged to specific families with documented losses. He'd falsified transfer records, created a paper trail showing those items had been destroyed in a warehouse fire, and smuggled them out over 6 months. Then he'd disappeared. Changed his name slightly, Thomas Edward Riley instead of Thomas Eugene Riley, moved to Colorado, built the cabin. Spent 14 years constructing the perfect hiding place, and dedicated the rest of his life to maintaining, preserving, and documenting everything, waiting for a day when he could safely return them. That day never came. The people he'd feared, the corrupt officials who'd shut down Operation Safeguard, they'd outlived him. Or their successors had. Thomas had died alone, the secret still buried, the mission incomplete. Marcus learned all this sitting in Vance's temporary office, reading reports compiled by historians the FBI had brought in. Owen sat beside him, absorbing everything with the quiet intensity that had become his trademark. "Your grandfather," Vance said, "was technically a criminal. He stole government property, falsified records, obstructed a federal program. But he was also right. We've gone through the archives. Items that went through official channels in 1947, less than 30% ever made it back to families. The rest were sold at auction, kept by museums who acquired them questionably or simply vanished." Marcus looked up. "So what now?" "Now we do what he couldn't. We return everything." The restitution process was complex. Each item required verification of ownership, location of surviving family members or their descendants, navigation of international law regarding wartime property claims. Some countries had treaties, others didn't. Some families were easy to find. Others had been scattered across continents, names changed, trails gone cold. Marcus became central to the effort. He knew his grandfather's system better than anyone. He'd spent months studying the journals, understanding the code Thomas had used, the abbreviations, the cross-references. Owen helped too, his young eyes catching details others missed, his methodical nature perfect for the painstaking work of matching items to claims. They worked alongside historians, genealogists, international law experts. The FBI set up a dedicated task force. Media coverage exploded. The story of the hermit who'd hidden a fortune to protect families he'd never met captured global attention. Reporters camped at the base of the mountain road. Marcus refused all interviews, but he couldn't stop the speculation. Some painted his grandfather as a hero, others as a thief who'd simply hidden his crimes well. The truth, Marcus knew, was more complicated. One afternoon, 8 months into the investigation, Vance called Marcus to her office. "We've identified 89 families or their descendants. Verified ownership on 62 items. The rest we're still working on." "How long?" "Could take years. Some families don't have sufficient documentation. Others are fighting among themselves over who inherits the claim. It's messy." Marcus nodded. He'd expected this. "But there's something else," Vance continued. She pulled out a file. "We found correspondence your grandfather kept separate, hidden in the binding of one of his journals, letters he never sent." She handed Marcus the file. Inside were drafts, pages written and rewritten, addressed to Marcus's father. Letters Thomas had composed over decades, trying to explain himself, trying to bridge the gap that had opened between them when he'd disappeared into the mountains. Marcus read one dated December 1981. "Son, I know you hate me. I know you think I abandoned you for a life of solitude and madness. Maybe you're right. But what I'm doing here, what I'm protecting, it matters more than my comfort or your approval. Someday someone will understand. Someday this will mean something. I hope when that day comes, you'll forgive me for choosing duty over family, though I suspect I'll be long gone by then." Marcus's throat tightened. His father had died angry, bitter, never reconciling with Thomas, never knowing the truth. "There are 17 more," Vance said quietly, "all unsent. I thought you should have them." Marcus closed the file, unable to speak. That evening, back at the cabin, Marcus sat on the porch with Owen. The boy was 10 now, almost 11. Tall for his age, thoughtful, serious in ways no child should have to be, but somehow managing it with grace. "Uncle Marcus," Owen said, "do you think Grandpa Thomas was happy?" Marcus considered the question. "I think he was at peace. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Happy is easy, light. Peace is knowing you're doing the right thing even when it's hard." Owen nodded slowly. "Like you, moving us here. Everyone said it was wrong, but you knew it was right." Marcus looked at his nephew, this remarkable kid who'd survived trauma and isolation and emerged stronger. "Yeah, buddy, kind of like that. I'm glad we stayed. I'm glad we found what Grandpa hid." "Even with all the chaos, the FBI, the media, everything?" Owen smiled. "Especially because of that. We're finishing what he started. That's important." Winter came again, their second on the mountain. The investigation continued, but the intensity had lessened. The FBI had removed everything from the underground chamber, though they'd allowed Marcus to seal it back up afterward. The cabin felt empty without the secret beneath it, but also lighter somehow. Director Vance had become an unlikely ally. She understood what Thomas had tried to do, even if she couldn't officially condone it. She made sure Marcus and Owen were protected from media harassment, kept them informed of every development, and fought to ensure the restitution process prioritized families over politics. One February morning, nearly a year after the discovery, Vance called. "We're ready for the first return. The painting from the Paris family. The daughter, Marguerite Duchamp, is flying to Washington next week. She wants to meet you." Marcus's heart raced. "Me? Why?" "Because you're Thomas Riley's family, because you helped make this possible, and because, in her words, I want to thank the people who kept my mother's hope alive." The meeting happened in a private room at the National Gallery. Marguerite was 73, elegant despite her years, with silver hair and her mother's eyes. She stood before the painting, a small landscape of the French countryside, and wept openly. "My mother described it to me 1,000 times, she said in accented English. "The tree in the corner, the way the light falls on the stream. I thought I'd never see it except in her stories." She turned to Marcus and Owen. "Your grandfather, He wrote to my mother for 12 years. Every letter, he promised he was keeping it safe. She thought he was crazy or a con artist or both. But she wanted to believe. And now, she gestured at the painting, now I know he was a man of honor. Marcus didn't know what to say. Owen stepped forward and held out his hand. I'm Owen. I'm sorry we couldn't return it sooner. Marguerite took his hand, then pulled him into a fierce hug. You were a child. You had nothing to apologize for. What you and your uncle have done, finishing this work, it's everything. The returns continued over the following year. Each one brought its own story, its own tears, its own healing. A set of coins returned to the grandson of a Jewish jeweler from Prague. A small sculpture reunited with the great-granddaughter of its Italian creator. Documents proving land ownership, helping a family in Poland reclaim property stolen 80 years ago. Not everything could be returned. Some families had no living descendants, some items had no clear owner. Those pieces were donated to museums with full provenance, displayed with plaques explaining Thomas Riley's mission and the importance of restitution. The financial value, the $265 million, became irrelevant. What mattered was connection, memory, justice delayed but not denied. Marcus and Owen's life changed, but not in ways they'd expected. They didn't become wealthy. The government had seized all assets, and rightfully so. But they became known, respected. People sought Marcus's expertise in authentication and provenance. Universities invited him to speak. Owen's story, the traumatized boy who'd healed on a mountain and helped return treasures to their owners, inspired books and articles. But they stayed in the cabin, made it truly theirs. Marcus finished the repairs his grandfather had started. Owen, now 11, helped design an addition, a proper library to house copies of all the documentation, a memorial to Thomas Riley's mission. Frank Cordell visited often, bringing supplies and stories. He'd known Thomas better than anyone, and he shared memories that filled in gaps, made the old man more real, more human. He used to say, Frank told them one evening, that every item he hid was a person, not a thing, a piece of someone's life, their history, their heart. He couldn't save the people, but he could save their memories. 2 years after the initial discovery, on a clear autumn day, Marcus and Owen hiked to a spot on their property they'd found months earlier. A small clearing with a view of 3 mountain peaks, where aspens turned gold in the fall and elk came to graze in summer. They'd brought a bronze plaque, commissioned and paid for with money Marcus had saved from his consulting work. They mounted it on a large boulder, securing it with epoxy meant to last centuries. The plaque read, Thomas Edward Riley, 1921 to 1994, guardian of memory, protector of legacy. He kept faith when others lost it. He preserved what others discarded. He waited in silence for someone to understand this mountain was his post, this secret was his burden, this restitution is his victory. Owen stood back reading it. Do you think he'd like it? Marcus put his hand on his nephew's shoulder. Yeah, buddy, I think he would. They stood there as the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Below them, the cabin stood solid, no longer hiding secrets, but standing as testament to one man's quiet courage. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them here. Sarah's death, Daniel's accident, Owen's trauma, the impossible choice to leave everything behind and move to this mountain, the warnings, the doubt, the fear. Everyone had told him not to raise a boy in isolation. Everyone had been wrong. Because it wasn't isolation they'd found here. It was purpose. It was healing. It was connection to something larger than themselves. Owen had grown from a silent, broken child into a thoughtful young man who understood sacrifice, responsibility, and the weight of doing what's right even when it's hard. He was thriving in ways no therapist or school could have predicted, homeschooled but well-educated, isolated but not alone, learning life's hardest lessons through experience rather than textbooks. And Marcus himself had transformed. The grieving widower drowning in construction jobs and medical debt had become someone who mattered, someone who'd finished a mission 70 years in the making, Someone who'd proven that one person or two people working together could actually change the world. The secret that everyone feared, the burden that everyone warned against, had become the foundation of something beautiful. As they walked back to the cabin, Owen asked, "What do we do now? The returns will keep happening for years, but the main work is done. What's next for us?" Marcus smiled. "We live, buddy. We build. We remember. And maybe we teach others that some warnings exist not because the path is wrong, but because it's hard. And hard doesn't mean impossible." "I want to be like Grandpa Thomas when I grow up," Owen said quietly. "Not hiding on a mountain, but doing something that matters even when no one sees it." "You already are," Marcus replied. "Every day." That night, after Owen had gone to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his grandfather's journals spread before him. He'd read them dozens of times, but he still found new details, new insights. Tonight, he found a passage from 1973. "I wonder sometimes if I'm a fool. If all this, the hiding, the protecting, the waiting, is just the delusion of an old man who can't let go. But then I touch these items, these pieces of people's lives, and I know they matter. I know someone's grandmother wept when this was taken. Someone's father died protecting that. These aren't objects. They're love made tangible. And love is always worth protecting, even if it costs everything." Marcus closed the journal and looked around the cabin, at the hand-hewn beams his grandfather had fitted, at the stone fireplace built to last centuries, at the workshop where secrets had been buried and then revealed. Thomas Riley had spent his life protecting love made tangible. Now Marcus and Owen were returning it to the people who'd loved it first. The warnings hadn't mattered. The isolation hadn't broken them. The secret hadn't destroyed them. Instead, it had saved them, all of them. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, in a cabin built by a man who'd carried impossible weight alone, two people slept peacefully, knowing they'd done right by a legacy that deserved to be finished. The treasure hadn't been in the items themselves. It had been in the mission, in the purpose, in the proof that some things are worth protecting, no matter the cost. And that was worth more than $265 million. It was worth everything. The legal battle began in earnest 3 months after the first items were returned. Despite the immunity agreement Marcus had negotiated, the Department of Justice filed a civil lawsuit claiming the estate of Thomas Riley owed restitution to the federal government for theft of property dating back to 1947. They sought full seizure of the cabin, the land, and any potential financial benefit Marcus or Owen might derive from the discovery. Marcus sat in a Denver law office across from attorney Sarah Westbrook, a woman in her 50s who specialized in international property law and had taken his case pro bono after reading about it in the Washington Post. "They're coming after everything," Sarah said, spreading documents across her desk. "The cabin, the 17 acres, even potential book or film rights to your story. They're arguing that you knowingly concealed stolen property and therefore forfeit any rights to assets connected to the crime." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "My grandfather built that cabin with his own hands in 1961. It has nothing to do with the items he hid. Legally, they're claiming it was constructed specifically to hide stolen property, making it part of the criminal enterprise." Sarah leaned back. "It's aggressive, probably too aggressive. But it tells me they're worried." "About what?" "Public opinion. This isn't a simple case of theft anymore. You've returned over 60 items to families. The media coverage has been overwhelmingly sympathetic. They're trying to intimidate you into a settlement before this goes to trial, because if it goes to trial, they risk looking like bullies going after a man who's doing exactly what the government should have done 70 years ago. Owen, now 12 and sitting in the corner of the office, spoke up. "So we fight them?" Sarah smiled at him. "If you're willing, yes, we fight." The case went to trial in federal court in Denver. It took 18 months just to get a court date, 18 months during which Marcus and Owen lived in limbo, unable to sell the property, unable to plan for the future, uncertain whether they'd lose everything. But something unexpected happened during those 18 months. The story grew. Families who'd received their belongings back began speaking publicly. Marguerite Duchamp flew from France to testify. The grandson of the Prague jeweler wrote an op-ed in the New York Times titled, "The Man Who Saved My Grandfather's Legacy." Historians published papers on Operation Safeguard, revealing the corruption Thomas Riley had suspected, documenting how items that went through official channels had indeed disappeared or been sold to private collectors. A groundswell of support built. People who understood what it meant to lose everything, to have history stolen, to watch bureaucracy fail the vulnerable. They rallied. Social media campaigns started. Petitions circulated. Congress members began asking uncomfortable questions about why the Department of Justice was prosecuting a man who'd done more to return stolen property than the government had in 7 decades. Marcus tried to stay out of the spotlight, but Owen embraced it in his own quiet way. Now 12, the boy who'd once been too traumatized to speak had become an eloquent advocate. He gave one interview to a journalist from National Public Radio, and it changed everything. "My uncle didn't steal anything," Owen said, his young voice steady. "He inherited a responsibility, and instead of running from it, he's spending years of his life making sure families get back what was taken from them. If that's a crime, then I don't understand justice anymore." The interview went viral. Clips played on news shows. Hashtags trended. The narrative shifted from "man hides stolen treasure" to "family completes 70-year mission of restitution." The trial itself was intense. Government prosecutors argued that regardless of Thomas Riley's intentions, he'd broken multiple federal laws. They presented evidence of falsified documents, unauthorized removal of government property, obstruction of federal programs. The facts were indisputable, but Sarah Westbrook didn't dispute the facts. Instead, she reframed them. Thomas Riley saw a system failing the people it was meant to serve, she argued in her opening statement. He saw valuable property, not valuable in dollars but in memory, disappearing into bureaucratic black holes. He saw families filing claims that went unanswered. He saw corruption, and he made a choice. Was it legal? No. Was it right? That's what we're here to determine. She called witness after witness. Historians who'd uncovered evidence of systematic theft within the Operation Safeguard program. Families who'd filed claims in 1947 that were never processed. Former government archivists who testified that items sent to central processing had often vanished without explanation. Then she called Marcus. He sat in the witness box for 6 hours over 2 days. He described finding the cabin, discovering the vault, reading his grandfather's journals. He explained the decision to contact the FBI rather than hiding or selling the items. He detailed the hundreds of hours he and Owen had spent helping identify rightful owners. The prosecution cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint him as someone who'd sought to profit from his discovery. But Marcus remained calm. "Did you ever consider selling any of the items?" the prosecutor asked. "No. Not even one? To pay bills? To secure your financial future?" "No." "Why not?" Marcus looked directly at the jury. "Because they weren't mine. They belonged to people who'd already lost everything once. I wasn't going to be the reason they lost it again." The courtroom was silent. Then Sarah called Owen to testify. The prosecution objected, arguing that a 12-year-old couldn't provide relevant testimony. The judge allowed it with limitations. Owen sat in the witness box, small but composed. Sarah asked him simple questions about life in the cabin, about helping with the documentation, about what he'd learned from his great-grandfather's mission. "Do you understand why your great-grandfather hid these items?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Owen said. "He didn't trust the system to do the right thing, and he was right not to." "How do you know he was right?" "Because we found evidence that items sent through official channels were stolen or sold, and because families who'd been waiting 70 years told us they'd never stopped hoping, never stopped asking, and no one ever helped them until we did." The prosecution declined to cross-examine. The trial lasted 7 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, Marcus and Owen sat together in the courtroom, hands clasped, barely breathing. The jury foreman stood. "In the matter of United States versus the estate of Thomas Riley on the charge of theft of government property, we find the estate not liable." Marcus exhaled. The foreman continued. On the charge of obstruction of federal programs, we find the estate not liable. On the charge of falsification of records, we find the estate not liable. Sarah squeezed Marcus's shoulder. Around them, the courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. Order. I'll have order. He looked at the jury. This is a complete acquittal. Yes, Your Honor. We find that while Thomas Riley's actions were technically illegal, they were undertaken in good faith to preserve property for its rightful owners when the federal government had failed in its duty to do so. We further find that Marcus Riley has acted in full compliance with the law since discovering the property and has facilitated the return of items beyond what could reasonably be expected. We see no basis for the government's claim to his personal property. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. The estate of Thomas Riley is cleared of all charges. The property at 17 Blackwood Trail remains in the possession of Marcus Riley. This court is adjourned. Marcus sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Owen threw his arms around his uncle's neck. We won. Uncle Marcus, we won. But it wasn't until they were outside, standing on the courthouse steps as reporters shouted questions, that Marcus fully understood what the verdict meant. They'd done more than win a legal case. They'd validated Thomas Riley's choice. They'd proven that sometimes breaking the law to uphold a higher principle is not just understandable, it's necessary. The returns accelerated after the trial. With legal questions resolved, families felt safer coming forward. The FBI's art crime team, now working collaboratively rather than adversarially with Marcus, identified 17 more families over the next year. Each return brought its own story. A small bronze sculpture reunited with the granddaughter of a resistance fighter from Belgium. She wept, holding it, explaining her grandfather had cast it himself and hidden it from Nazi soldiers, only to have it confiscated later by liberating forces who'd thought it was stolen property. A set of letters, just personal correspondence between a husband and wife separated during the war, returned to their son who'd never known his father. The letters revealed a love story he'd only heard fragments of, filling gaps in his family history. A photograph album containing pictures of 3 generations of a Polish family returned to the sole surviving member, a woman in her 90s who'd thought everyone and everything from her childhood had been erased. Marcus and Owen attended as many return ceremonies as they could. Each one reinforced why this mattered. This wasn't about treasure. It was about identity, memory, proof that lives mattered, that loss could be acknowledged, that even 70 years later, justice could find its way home. Owen, now 13, began documenting the returns himself. He interviewed families, recorded their reactions, compiled their stories. What started as a personal project evolved into something larger. A book publisher approached him about turning the material into a historical account. Owen titled it, The Guardian's Legacy: How One Man's Secret Became Everyone's Hope. The book was published when Owen was 14. It became a bestseller, not because of sensationalism, but because of heart. Owen wrote with clarity and compassion beyond his years, weaving together his great-grandfather's story, the family's stories, and his own journey from traumatized silence to purposeful advocacy. Royalties from the book went into a foundation Owen and Marcus established, the Riley Preservation Project. Its mission was simple: help locate and return displaced property from conflicts around the world, continue the work Thomas Riley had started, and teach younger generations about the importance of remembering. Marcus's mother called 2 days after the foundation was announced. It was the first time they'd spoken in 4 years. "Marcus," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I saw Owen on the news, talking about the foundation." "Yeah, he's pretty amazing." A long pause. "I was wrong. About everything. About you moving to that cabin. About raising him in isolation. About all of it. I thought you were running away, but you were running towards something I couldn't see." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Mom, let me finish. That boy Owen, he's incredible, thoughtful, articulate, purposeful, and you did that. You gave him space to heal and grow into someone extraordinary. I should have trusted you. I should have supported you. Instead, I judged you, and I'm sorry." Marcus closed his eyes. I forgive you. Can I visit? I'd like to see the cabin, meet the man my son has become, maybe get to know my grandson better. Yeah, Mum, we'd like that. She visited 3 weeks later, driving up the mountain road Marcus had climbed hundreds of times now. She stood in the clearing, looking at the cabin, and tears filled her eyes. Your grandfather built this, she said softly. I always thought he was running from us, from family. But he was building something, wasn't he? Yeah, Marcus said. He was building a sanctuary for things that needed protecting. His mother walked through the cabin slowly, touching the hand-hewn beams, the stone fireplace, the furniture Thomas had crafted. In the workshop, she stood where the vault had been, now just floorboards again, but somehow still significant. He spent his whole life alone to protect people he'd never meet, she said. That takes a kind of strength I don't think I ever understood. Owen came in from outside, carrying firewood. He was tall now, nearly as tall as Marcus, his shoulders broad from years of mountain work. He saw his grandmother and smiled shyly. Hi, Grandma Jean. She pulled him into a fierce hug. Look at you. You're almost grown. Over dinner that night, cooked on the wood stove Thomas had installed 60 years ago, they talked. Really talked. Jean apologized to Owen for not fighting to be part of his life after his parents died. Owen, with characteristic grace, told her it was okay, that sometimes people needed time to understand things. What do you want to be when you grow up? Jean asked him. Owen considered the question. A historian, I think. Or maybe an archivist, someone who helps preserve stories. Because that's what Grandpa Thomas really did. He preserved stories. The items were just the medium. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. This kid, this remarkable young man who'd survived trauma and isolation and emerged wiser than most adults, understood something fundamental about legacy and purpose. Jean stayed for 3 days. On her last evening, she and Marcus sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. You did good, she said quietly. Better than good. You saved that boy, and you finished something important. We're not finished yet, Marcus replied. There are still items being returned, still families being found. The work continues. But the hard part is done. The mission is established. People know the story. She looked at him. What happens to you now? You're only 48. You've got a whole life ahead of you. Are you going to spend it all on this mountain? Marcus had been asking himself the same question. The foundation was running. Owen was thriving. The cabin was secure. What came next? I don't know, he admitted. This place, it's home. But you're right. There's more out there. You could travel, see the families in person, help with more complicated returns. You've become an expert in wartime property recovery. People need that expertise. Marcus nodded slowly. The idea had appeal. Over the following months, he began accepting consulting jobs. Museums hired him to verify provenance. Families with questionable heirlooms sought his authentication services. International organizations asked him to speak at conferences about restitution and historical preservation. He and Owen traveled together when Owen's homeschool schedule allowed. They went to Paris, to Prague, to Warsaw, meeting families, seeing the items Thomas had protected now displayed in homes where they belonged. Each trip reinforced the importance of the work. But they always came back to the cabin. It was their anchor, their center, the place where everything had begun. Owen turned 15 the winter of their 5th year on the mountain. He'd grown into a thoughtful young man, tall and strong, with his father's kindness and something else, something that came from being raised in silence and purpose. He spoke multiple languages now, taught himself through online courses and books. He'd become the Foundation's primary researcher, using genealogical databases and historical archives to trace families with a skill that amazed even professional researchers. One March evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Owen asked, Uncle Marcus, do you ever regret it, leaving Denver, bringing me here? Marcus looked at his nephew, this person who'd become his son in all but name. Not for a second. Even with all the chaos? The FBI, the trial, the media? Especially because of that. We turned chaos into purpose. We took something broken and made it meaningful. Owen nodded, staring into the flames. I've been thinking about college. Marcus's chest tightened. He'd known this day would come. Yeah? What are you thinking? There's a program at Georgetown. International history with a focus on cultural property law. It's competitive, but I think I have a shot. You'd be leaving the mountain. For a while, but this is home. I'd come back. Owen looked at him. Is that okay? Marcus smiled, emotion thick in his throat. It's more than okay. It's exactly what should happen. You go learn everything you can. Then you come back and teach others. What will you do while I'm gone? Keep the foundation running. Continue the returns. Maybe finally finish that addition I've been planning. Marcus paused. And try not to fall apart without you here. Owen laughed. You'll be fine. You're the toughest person I know. I learned from watching you, buddy. Owen applied to Georgetown that spring. His application essay told his story, from traumatized silence to purposeful advocacy, from discovering a hidden vault to helping return millions in stolen property. His recommendations came from Director Vance of the FBI, from Marguerite Duchamp in France, from historians and legal experts who'd worked with him. He was accepted with a full scholarship. The day Marcus drove him to the airport in Denver, 5 years and 8 months after they'd first arrived at the cabin, both of them fought tears. You sure you're ready for this? Marcus asked as they stood at the security checkpoint. No, Owen admitted, but I don't think you're ever really ready for important things. You just do them anyway. Marcus pulled him into a hug. Call me when you land, and whenever you need to talk, and randomly, just because. I will. Owen stepped back, shouldering his backpack. Uncle Marcus, thank you for everything. For not giving up on me when everyone said you should. For bringing me to the mountain. For showing me that the hardest paths sometimes lead to the most important places. Marcus couldn't speak, just nodded. Owen walked through security, turned once to wave, then disappeared into the crowd. Marcus stood there for a long time, watching the space where his nephew had been, feeling the weight and lightness of letting go. The cabin felt enormous and empty without Owen. For the first week, Marcus barely slept, kept waking up expecting to hear the boys breathing from the next room. But gradually, he adjusted. He threw himself into foundation work, processing new claims, coordinating with international agencies, traveling to oversee complex returns. Owen called every Sunday, telling stories about classes, roommates, the overwhelming noise of city life after years of mountain silence. He was thriving, but homesick. Marcus understood completely. 2 years passed. Owen came home for summers and holidays, each time more grown, more confident, more certain of his path. He'd declared a double major, adding anthropology to his history degree. He was writing his senior thesis on the ethics of cultural property restitution. In his junior year, he brought home a guest. A girl named Aria Chen, whose great-grandparents had lost everything fleeing Shanghai in 1937. She'd heard Owen speak at a campus event about the Riley Foundation and wanted to know more. Marcus liked her immediately. She was sharp, curious, unafraid to ask hard questions. She and Owen had that easy chemistry that comes from shared values and mutual respect. Over dinner, Aria asked Marcus the question everyone eventually asked. Do you ever wish you'd kept something, just one piece? The money could have changed your life. Marcus shook his head. It did change my life, just not through money. I got something more valuable. Purpose. Connection to my grandfather. The chance to raise Owen somewhere that healed him. You can't buy that. But you sacrificed so much. Your career, your privacy, years of legal battles. I didn't sacrifice, Marcus said. I traded. Old life for new one. Emptiness for meaning. Seems like a good deal to me. Aria smiled. Owen talks about you constantly. You know that. How you're the strongest person he knows. How you showed him that integrity matters more than comfort. Marcus felt his face warm. He's the strong one. I just gave him space to find it. Later, After Arya had gone to bed in the guest room they'd added to the cabin, Owen and Marcus sat on the porch under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "I'm going to ask Arya to marry me," Owen said quietly. "After graduation. Is that crazy? We're only 21. Marcus thought about Sarah, about marrying her at 23, about the joy and heartbreak that had followed. "It's not crazy if you're sure." "I'm sure. She gets it. The foundation, the mission, the importance of finishing what Grandpa Thomas started. She wants to be part of it." "Then you have my blessing, not that you need it." Owen smiled. "I do, though. You're my dad in every way that matters. Your blessing is the only one I care about." Marcus pulled his nephew, his son, into a hug. "Then you have it, and I'm proud of you. So damn proud." 3 years later, Marcus stood in that same clearing where he'd first seen the cabin, watching Owen and Arya exchange vows. The ceremony was small, just close friends. Frank Cordell, Director Vance, a few families who'd become part of their extended network. Jean was there, beaming, reconciled with her son and proud of her grandson. The officiant spoke about legacy, about how we're all connected to those who came before and those who come after, about how love is the thread that ties us across generations. Marcus thought about Thomas Riley, dying alone on this mountain, never knowing if his mission would be completed, never knowing that 70 years later his great-grandson would stand in this clearing, pledging his life to a woman who shared his values, surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by one man's refusal to let important things disappear. After the wedding, as guests danced to music from a portable speaker and ate food prepared by Rosie's diner, Frank pulled Marcus aside. "Thomas would be proud," the old man said, "of all of it, the returns, the foundation, the family you've built." "I hope so. I know so. I knew him better than most. He was a man who believed some things were worth protecting no matter the cost. You've proven him right." Marcus looked around at the celebration, at Owen and Arya laughing, at Jean talking animatedly with former FBI agents who'd become friends, at the cabin standing solid against the mountain backdrop. Everyone had warned him not to raise a boy in the mountains. They'd said isolation would destroy them both, that secrets were dangerous, that running from the world was cowardice. They'd been wrong about everything. The isolation had healed. The secret had given purpose. And they hadn't been running from the world. They'd been creating space to understand what mattered. 5 years later, Marcus was 63. Owen and Arya had 2 children, twin girls named Sarah and Jennifer, after the grandmothers they'd never meet. The girls spent summers at the cabin, learning to split wood and identify trees, and understand that some treasures can't be measured in money. The Riley Foundation had facilitated the return of over 300 items to families in 17 countries. They'd partnered with museums, universities, and governments to establish better protocols for restitution. They'd trained a new generation of researchers and advocates. And Marcus had written his own book, not about the treasure, but about his grandfather. A biography pieced together from journals, interviews with people who'd known Thomas, and his own understanding gained from walking the same paths, making similar choices. He titled it The Weight of Secrets, One Man's 70-Year Mission to Return What War Had Stolen. It became required reading in several university programs on cultural property law. But Marcus's favorite feedback came from a letter sent to the foundation. It was from a woman in Argentina whose grandmother had received a small locket that had belonged to her mother. The letter read, "My grandmother held that locket and wept for 3 hours. It was the only proof she had left that her mother existed, that her family had been real. She'd spent 89 years believing everything was lost. You gave her back not just a locket, but her history. How do you thank someone for that? You can't. But I'll try anyway. Thank you for finishing what needed finishing. Thank you for proving that some people still believe in doing right, even when it's hard. Thank you for being guardians when the world needed you." Marcus kept that letter framed on his desk. One September evening, 7 years after Owen's wedding, Marcus sat on the porch of the cabin alone. Owen and his family were in Washington, where Owen now worked as a consultant for the State Department's Cultural Heritage Center. Arya ran the foundation's day-to-day operations. The twins were in first grade, already showing signs of their father's thoughtfulness and their mother's determination. Marcus was officially retired, though he still consulted occasionally. Mostly he maintained the cabin, hiked the mountains, and enjoyed the quiet that had once terrified his family. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo album. Pictures spanning 14 years. Owen at 8, silent and traumatized. Owen at 12, testifying in court. Owen at 18, leaving for college. Owen at 24, getting married. Owen at 28, holding his newborn daughters. And threaded through all of it, pictures of returns, families reunited with belongings, ceremonies honoring Thomas Riley, plaques in museums acknowledging the source of items, letters of gratitude from around the world. Marcus's phone rang. Owen's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, buddy." "Hey, just wanted to call. The girls asked about the cabin today, when they could come visit Grandpa Marcus." Marcus smiled. They called him Grandpa, not great uncle, just Grandpa. And it felt right. Anytime, you know that. "We're thinking Thanksgiving. Arya's parents, too. Make it a big family thing." "I'd love that." A pause, then Owen's voice softer. "I was thinking about Grandpa Thomas today, about everything he did, everything he sacrificed. And I realized something." "What's that?" "He wasn't alone, not really. He had you, even though he didn't know it. He had me. He had everyone who's been part of the returns. His sacrifice created a community, a mission that brought people together across decades. That's not loneliness, that's legacy." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. "Yeah, that's exactly what it is." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the deepening twilight, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. From a cramped Denver apartment to this mountain sanctuary. From a broken widower barely surviving to a man who'd completed a mission 7 decades in the making. From being warned not to raise a boy in isolation to watching that boy become a man who changed the world. The warnings hadn't mattered. The doubts hadn't mattered. What mattered was the choice to see possibility where others saw only problems, to find purpose where others saw only pain, to believe that sometimes the hardest path is exactly the one you're meant to walk. Marcus stood and walked to the edge of the clearing, looking out over the mountains that had become home. Somewhere beneath this land, in that sealed vault now empty, his grandfather's secret had waited for someone to find it, someone who would understand, someone who would care enough to finish what had been started. That someone had been him, and Owen, and hundreds of others who'd joined the mission. The cabin that had hidden $265 million had taught them all the most valuable lesson. Some fortunes can't be measured in money. They're measured in connections made, in justice served, in promises kept, in children healed, in families honored, in memories preserved. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to speak the truth. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to be given back. And sometimes the warnings we fear the most are simply tests to see if we're strong enough to do what matters anyway. As the first stars appeared above the Colorado Rockies, Marcus Riley smiled. He'd passed the test. They all had. And the legacy would continue, not buried in darkness, but shining in the light for generations to come. Because some things are meant to stay hidden only until the right people are brave enough to bring them home. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe legacy matters more than wealth.